In a world where love often comes when we least expect it, this story will take you on an unforgettable journey of connection, heartbreak, and second chances. Join us as two strangers meet under unlikely circumstances and discover a bond that neither money nor time can break. If you're someone who believes in slow burn romance, real emotions, and meaningful storytelling, this one's for you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below your favorite moment. We love hearing from you. Love hearing. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, echoing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a string quartet. Sophia Bennett adjusted the hem of her navy blue dress, balancing a plate of hors d'oeuvres in one hand while scanning the room for someone she knew. She didn't. The only reason she was even at this wedding was because her college roommate had begged her to attend as a +1. She didn't know the bride, barely knew the groom. And now here she was, trapped in a sea of champagne and designer gowns. As she approached the refreshment table, she spotted the last glass of champagne. Her eyes locked onto it with something close to determination. She reached out, only for her fingers to bump into someone else's hand reaching for the exact same glass. "Oh, I'm sorry," Sophia said quickly, flashing a polite smile. "Didn't mean to." "I think we both saw it at the same time," the man replied, lifting a brow. He was tall, sharply dressed in a custom-tailored tuxedo, with piercing blue eyes and a jawline that looked sculpted out of marble. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between amused and intrigued. Sophia narrowed her eyes playfully. "I think I reached first." That sounds like a matter of perspective," he replied smoothly, not letting go of the glass. For a split second they held it together, neither willing to back down. The tension was ridiculous and oddly exhilarating. "Tell you what," Sophia said, tilting her head. "You can have the champagne if you admit I got here first." The man chuckled, a low, rich sound that caught her off guard. "I don't usually lose arguments, but tonight I'll make an exception." He let go of the glass and gestured for her to take it. Sophia raised it with mock triumph. Victory tastes sweeter when it's earned. She turned to walk away, half expecting the moment to end there. But before she could take a step, he spoke again. "You've got spirit. I like that." She looked back, eyebrows raised. "And you've got charm. I'm still deciding if I like that." He grinned. "Fair enough." They didn't exchange names, didn't shake hands. Just a lingering look, and then she was gone, blending back into the crowd with her stolen prize. Nathaniel Stone stood still, watching her disappear into the sea of strangers. She had no idea who he was, and for the first time in a long while that thrilled him. There were no introductions, no formalities, just a moment, a spark, and that was all it took. Sophia wandered through the ballroom with her glass of champagne in hand, feeling oddly victorious and slightly off balance. There was something about that man, his confidence, the way he looked at her like she was more than just another guest, that unsettled her. She shook it off. Whoever he was, he clearly wasn't used to hearing no, and Sophia Bennett didn't exist to stroke egos, especially ones wrapped in $1,000 tuxedos. Moments later, the MC stepped onto the platform at the front of the room, tapping the microphone to gather attention. The room hushed as the spotlight shifted toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC began, "we are honored tonight by a very special guest, the man whose generosity made this evening possible, a leader, a visionary, and, if you were lucky enough to meet him already, a gentleman. Please welcome Mr. Nathaniel Stone." Sophia froze. Her champagne hovered midair. Nathaniel Stone. The name hit her like a slap, familiar, powerful, and unmistakable. Her eyes widened as she slowly turned toward the front of the room. There he was, standing confidently as applause echoed around him, smiling politely but with that same glint in his eyes. The same man she'd just argued with over a glass of champagne. People began whispering around her. "He's worth billions." "That's the Stone Tech CEO, isn't it?" "I heard he's never been married." Suddenly, her playful sparring with a stranger didn't feel so harmless anymore. It felt exposed, vulnerable. Before she could process the wave of emotions crashing inside her, he stepped down from the stage and began weaving through the crowd. His eyes scanned the room and then found her. She panicked. Sophia turned quickly, retreating toward the side exit of the ballroom, her heels clicking a little too fast against the marble floor. But before she could make it out, a voice called from behind her. "You're not going to run away, are you?" She stopped, slowly turned. Nathaniel stood just a few feet away, calm, unreadable. The same man, but somehow not. Not now that she knew who he really was. "Mr. Stone," she said coolly, lifting her chin. He winced slightly. "Ouch, back to formalities already?" "You weren't exactly forthcoming with yours." "I was enjoying the anonymity," he admitted. "It's rare." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "So you play games with strangers to entertain yourself at weddings?" Number I had no idea you'd be the most interesting part of my night. There it was again, that effortless charm, now backed by wealth and power, and it irritated her more than it should have. "Well," she said, taking a step back, "thank you for the champagne, Mr. Stone. I'll treasure the moment." She turned again, but this time he didn't call after her. He simply watched her walk away, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He'd been seen, not as a billionaire, not as a brand, but as a man, and he wasn't about to let her disappear so easily. Sophia barely made it to the terrace before the cool evening air hit her cheeks, stealing the warmth left by the champagne and the encounter she hadn't quite processed yet. She leaned against the stone railing, eyes fixed on the sparkling city skyline, trying to will the embarrassment away. Of course he had to be that Nathaniel Stone. She'd read about him. Tech empire mogul. Never stays in one place too long. Never keeps anyone around too long either. The kind of man whose life came with NDAs and headlines, and she'd argued with him over a drink like he was any other guy at a wedding buffet line. But before the air could settle in her lungs, a voice interrupted the quiet. "You know, most people ask for my business card. Not many walk away from me twice in one night." She turned slowly. Nathaniel stood at the entrance of the terrace, hands tucked in his pockets, posture casual but eyes sharp. He walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel the quiet intensity radiating from him. "I thought you'd be too busy taking pictures with donors," she said, arms crossed. "I was," he replied, but then I remembered something more interesting was out here. Sophia looked away, jaw tight. "I'm not interested in playing games." "Neither am I," he said, stepping closer. "I just want to dance." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "One dance," he repeated, offering his hand. "No press. No assumptions, just you and me and whatever this strange energy between us is." Sophia hesitated, heart thudding in her chest. Logic screamed no, but something else, something braver and more curious, overpowered it. Wordlessly, she placed her hand in his. He led her back inside, not to the crowded dance floor, but to a quiet corner where the string quartet played a soft, slow tune. As he drew her in, his hand found the small of her back, his touch surprisingly gentle. They moved slowly, in sync, eyes locked. Neither spoke at first. The silence between them said too much already. "You're not what I expected," Nathaniel murmured after a moment. "And what did you expect?" she asked, voice low. "Someone impressed. Someone who'd pretend to be indifferent but secretly want the attention." Sophia tilted her head. "And now? Now I know you don't pretend." She looked up at him, eyes searching his. "You're dangerous." He smiled faintly. "How so?" "Because you say things like that and expect me to forget everything I know about men like you." He stopped moving but didn't let her go. "Then let me prove I'm not like them." She didn't respond, but she didn't step away either. As the music faded, they remained in each other's arms, surrounded by people but lost in something neither of them could explain, yet neither wanted to end. The music ended, but Nathaniel didn't let go right away. His hand lingered at the small of Sophia's back, and she didn't pull away either. For a moment they were suspended in something silent and electric, a space between goodbye and something not yet named. Finally, Sophia took a step back, composing herself. "Well," she said, straightening her dress, her voice quieter now. "That was unexpected." Nathaniel's smile was subtle. "Most of the best things are." Sophia rolled her eyes just enough to deflect the warmth rising in her chest. "Are you always this good at making strangers forget why they should walk away from you?" "Only when I don't want them to." Before she could formulate a clever response, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small black card. No logo, no company name, just a name in silver embossed lettering, Nathaniel Stone, and beneath it, a personal number. He held it between two fingers, eyes locked on hers. "No assistants, no gatekeepers, just me." Sophia stared at the card but didn't take it. "Why?" "Because I'd like to see you again. Without the suits, the lights, the speeches, just us." She hesitated. "You say that like it's simple." "It could be," he said softly, "if you let it." She reached out slowly and took the card from his hand. Her fingers brushed his, too long, too deliberate. Before either of them could say another word, someone from the party called Nathaniel's name across the ballroom. He looked toward the sound, his face shifting back into the polished version of himself, charming, composed, the man people expected. Then he turned back to her. "I have to go play Billionaire for a few more minutes," he said with a touch of regret. "But I meant what I said." He hesitated. "Will you call me?" Sophia met his gaze, steady and unreadable. "I haven't decided yet." Nathaniel smiled at that, a little too knowingly. "I hope you do." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Sophia stood still, the card now warm in her palm, her heartbeat louder than the string quartet. She slipped it into her clutch like it might burn her fingers if she held it any longer. The rest of the night passed in a blur, wedding speeches, champagne refills, polite laughter. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him. To the way he looked at her like she was the only real thing in the room. To the way she'd felt something real too, and didn't know what scared her more, that she believed him or that she wanted to. That night, back in her apartment, she sat on her bed with the card in her hand, staring at the number. One call. That's all it would take to either open a door or lose her balance completely, and Sophia Bennett didn't lose control. At least she never used to. Sophia hadn't called. The card still sat untouched on her nightstand, its sleek black surface a silent reminder of the man she wasn't ready to let in. She'd told herself she needed space, time to think, that maybe the moment at the wedding had just been one of those strange, charged encounters that belonged in the past, not her real life. But the universe, or more likely Nathaniel Stone, had other plans. It was late afternoon when she pushed open the door of the small art gallery she worked part-time at on weekends. The air inside was cool, quiet, smelling faintly of paint and aged wood. She was halfway through rearranging a sculpture display when the soft chime of the doorbell rang behind her. She glanced up and froze. Nathaniel stood in the doorway. No tuxedo, no press. Just jeans, a fitted black coat, and the same arresting eyes that had haunted her sleep for days. Her breath caught. How did you find me?" He stepped in casually, as though they were old friends meeting for coffee. "I asked someone who owed me a favor." Her eyes narrowed. "You tracked me down?" "I prefer the term followed a hunch," he said, his tone light, but his gaze anything but. Sophia crossed her arms. "You're not supposed to show up like this." "Maybe not, but I couldn't wait." Silence stretched between them, thick with all the things neither of them had said. "You didn't call," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I told myself I'd leave it alone, that if you wanted to see me again, you would. But then I realized I didn't want to be another what if in your life or mine." Sophia looked down, heart pounding. "You don't get it, Nathaniel. People like you don't come into people like my life without leaving damage behind. His expression shifted, the amusement fading. And people like me don't usually meet someone who sees past the money, the name, the noise. He stepped closer, stopping just short of touching her. But you did, and I'm not here for a game, Sophia. I'm here because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment you walked away with that damn champagne. Her laugh cracked through the tension, dry and disbelieving. So now I'm your exception? No, he said. You're the first thing that's felt real in a very long time. Sophia's defenses wavered. She wasn't used to men showing up. Not when it mattered. Not when it was inconvenient. She was used to being the one who walked away first, before someone else had the chance to. And yet here he was, uninvited, unexpected, unwilling to let her disappear. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know whether to retreat or reach out. So instead, she asked softly, "What now?" Nathaniel smiled. "Now," he said, "you let me take you to dinner." And against everything she told herself, she didn't say no. The restaurant wasn't what she expected. No private rooftop, no velvet ropes or paparazzi waiting outside. Just a quiet Italian bistro tucked in the corner of a sleepy street, lit by soft amber lamps and warmed by the smell of garlic and fire-roasted bread. It was the kind of place people went to fall in love without meaning to. Nathaniel didn't speak much at first. He simply pulled out her chair, ordered her favorite wine, how he knew that she didn't dare ask, and watched her with eyes that saw far more than she liked. For someone who had built her life on control, Sophia felt deeply unprepared. They started with light conversation, art, music, books. But it didn't take long before the surface gave way, like ice cracking beneath careful footsteps. "You don't seem like the kind of man who hides in quiet restaurants," she said at one point, twirling the edge of her napkin. "I'm not," he admitted. "But I've learned that loud rooms drown out real conversations." She raised an eyebrow. "So this is a real conversation?" He leaned in slightly. "Isn't that what you've been waiting for?" Sophia wanted to deny it, to pretend this was just a curiosity, a passing interest. But the weight in her chest told her otherwise. "All right," she said after a pause, looking him dead in the eye. "You first. Tell me something true." He didn't flinch. "I haven't slept through the night in over a year," he said calmly. "Not since my mother passed. I keep thinking if I build more, succeed more, the silence in my penthouse won't feel so loud." Sophia wasn't expecting that. She blinked. "That's honest." "You asked for truth." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll give you mine." Her voice grew quiet. "I keep people at a distance because I've never trusted that anyone would stay, not when things got hard, so I became good at walking away first." Nathaniel didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort or a clever line. He just listened. And that somehow unraveled her more than anything else could. "I don't want to be another reason you run," he said softly. "And I don't want to be another story you forget," she replied. Their meals sat mostly untouched between them. A different kind of hunger had taken over now, one that couldn't be satisfied with food or wine but with something deeper, recognition, connection. And when the waiter asked if they wanted dessert, Nathaniel simply looked at her and said, "Let's go." Back outside, the night air wrapped around them like a secret. They didn't say much on the drive home. But when he walked her to her door and she turned to face him, something unspoken passed between them. She stepped forward. He didn't ask permission. Their kiss was quiet, slow, searching, the kind of kiss that didn't demand anything but offered everything. It wasn't just about desire, it was about trust. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt like running. For the first time in a long while, Sophia woke up with a calm in her chest instead of the usual weight. The night before had felt like something out of a dream, but not the kind wrapped in fantasy. It had been quiet, raw, and real. Nathaniel had kissed her like she mattered, not like a possession, not like a prize, like a choice. She hadn't expected to let him in. And now she couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, She didn't want to let him go. But reality always has a way of clawing its way back in. Late that afternoon, as she prepared to leave for work, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. At first, she almost ignored it, but then she saw the words, "Thought you should know who you're getting close to. Don't say you weren't warned." Attached was a photo. Nathaniel at a lavish charity gala, his arm around a woman with striking red lipstick and a tight smile. The headline beneath it read, "Stone's latest flame? Rumors swirl after weekend appearance." Sophia stared at the screen, her chest tightening, breath catching in her throat. The image looked recent, too recent, and the woman, effortless, stunning. Everything Sophia wasn't trying to be. Her thoughts raced. Had she misunderstood everything? Was last night just another line in his long, polished script? The knock on her door startled her. When she opened it, Nathaniel stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee and a crooked smile. "I figured you hadn't eaten yet." But one look at her face and his smile faltered. "Sophia, what's wrong?" She held up her phone. "You tell me." He glanced at the screen, then exhaled sharply, stepping inside. "That photo's from a month ago, a publicity event my team insisted I attend. That woman is a PR executive. We smiled for the cameras. That was it." Sophia didn't move. "I didn't lie to you," he said more firmly, "but I can't control what the media spins." "You could have told me," she said, voice tight. "You could have warned me what I was walking into." "I didn't think I needed to," he replied, "because I thought we, wasn't about that world." She turned away, crossing her arms to hold herself together. "It's easy for you to say that when you're used to being the story. I'm not." There was silence. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Not of you, but of what happens if I start believing in you and I'm wrong." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Then let me give you reasons to believe, one day at a time, no games, no pretending." She looked at him, eyes still guarded but softening. "And if I run?" "I'll follow," he said, "as many times as it takes." Something fragile passed between them. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't ask him to leave, and maybe, for now, that was enough. 3 days passed before Nathaniel reached out again. He gave her space, just like she needed, but Sophia could feel the distance like a weight pressing down on her chest. Every night she found herself staring at the ceiling, wondering if walking away from him now would be self-preservation or a mistake she'd never stop regretting. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning, her phone rang. Nathaniel. She stared at the screen for a beat too long before answering. His voice was quiet, lower than usual. "There's an event tonight. It's important. Public, flashy, everything I hate. But I want you there. Not because you have to be, but because I want you by my side." Sophia froze. He wasn't just asking her on a date. He was asking her to walk into his world, with cameras flashing, whispers trailing behind them, and expectations she'd never be able to control. She said nothing for a moment. Then, "Text me the details." When she stepped out of the black car that evening, she was no longer just Sophia Bennett, gallery assistant and woman who valued her privacy like armor. She was Nathaniel Stone's date. The flashes started immediately. Dozens of photographers lined the entrance of the museum fundraiser. People turned to stare, whispering her name like it was something new to taste. She walked next to Nathaniel, his hand steady at the small of her back, his body like a shield against the chaos. And yet she felt exposed, every inch of her. Inside, it was worse. Socialites in couture dresses, men in suits worth more than her annual income, champagne, elegance, and curated smiles. Nathaniel blended in effortlessly. She did not. "You okay?" he asked quietly, leaning in. "Not even a little," she admitted. He smiled. "Good. That means you're not pretending." An older woman approached them, lips painted blood red, her voice silked with condescension. "Nathaniel, darling, you didn't tell us you were bringing someone new." Sophia extended her hand, calm on the outside. Sophia Bennett. Just a +1 tonight. The woman's gaze swept her up and down. Of course. The conversation moved on, but the sting lingered. Later, as Sophia stood near the balcony trying to catch her breath, Nathaniel found her. You handled that well. She looked at him, frustration brimming beneath the surface. This isn't me, Nathaniel. This world? These people? I don't belong here. Neither do I, he said. But I'm here, and I'd rather be here with you than anywhere else alone. She swallowed hard. I don't know if I can do this. He stepped closer. Then don't do it for them. Do it for us. She looked away, heart racing. What if I don't fit? He reached for her hand. Then we'll make a space that does. For the first time all night, she breathed. And though she wasn't sure where she stood in this world of power and pretense, one thing was certain. She wasn't standing in it alone. The morning after the fundraiser, Sophia woke to a message from Nathaniel. Call in sick. I'm stealing you for the day. She stared at the screen, torn between logic and the fluttering pull in her chest. She should go to work. She had responsibilities. But the memory of last night, the stares, the whispered judgment, and the way Nathaniel had looked at her like she was the only thing real in a room full of masks, lingered like a phantom warmth. So she called in. 2 hours later, they were driving upstate, city skyscrapers shrinking in the rearview mirror. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was easy, like they both needed to remember what it felt like to breathe without performance. He brought her to a quiet lakeside cabin tucked among pine trees. There were no photographers, no voices, just wind in the trees, the crackle of firewood, and the sound of him laughing when she tried, and failed, to chop a piece of wood herself. You find this funny? She asked, panting and glaring at the stubborn log. Painfully, he said, grinning as he took the axe from her and split it in one fluid motion. She stuck out her tongue. Show off. He only smiled and offered her his hand. Later, they sat by the lake on a weathered wooden bench, his jacket draped over her shoulders, the sky turning soft with twilight. I used to come here with my mom, Nathaniel said quietly, his voice barely more than a breath. Before things got complicated. Sophia turned to him. He was staring at the water, eyes distant. You don't talk about her much. I don't talk about a lot of things, he admitted. But with you, I want to. Sophia's heart tightened. She knew what it cost someone like him to say that, to allow vulnerability in a world that punished it. I like this version of you, she said gently. He looked at her, something raw flickering in his gaze. You make me want to be this version. She didn't know who leaned in first, but suddenly they were kissing again, slow, deep, deliberate. Not like the first time when curiosity had carried them forward. This time it was something else, something more dangerous. Because this time it wasn't just a kiss, it was a risk. They pulled apart only when the sky faded into blue and stars began to scatter across the lake's reflection. I'm falling for you, he said, the words so quiet she barely heard them. Sophia blinked, her chest tightening with something sharp and beautiful. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I, he replied, but I'd rather figure it out with you than without you. They didn't need anything else that night. No vows, no promises. But in the stillness of the cabin, with hands intertwined and hearts exposed, love had finally stopped knocking. It had stepped inside. Sophia stood on the edge of Nathaniel's rooftop terrace, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her, glittering beneath the night sky. The wind tugged at her hair, and somewhere behind her the glass doors clicked softly as he stepped out. He didn't speak right away. Maybe he could sense that she was somewhere else, caught between fear and hope, past and future. I have to go to London for a few weeks, he said finally, voice low. Business. It came up fast. She turned, surprised. When were you going to tell me? Now, he said, because I didn't want this to be goodbye. Sophia's heart thudded painfully. Of course, the world he lived in didn't pause, not even for love. I'm not asking you to follow me, he added quickly. I wouldn't do that, but I also can't pretend I'm not scared I'll come back and find you gone. She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had been untouchable, and now stood before her completely exposed, vulnerable, waiting. I've spent my whole life making sure I never needed anyone, she said softly, that I never stayed long enough to be someone's reason to leave. He took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. And now? Now? Her voice trembled. You make me want to stay, but it terrifies me. Nathaniel reached for her hand. I don't need perfect. I don't need promises you're not ready to give. I just want the truth, right here, right now. She stared at their joined hands, her pulse pounding in her ears. And then, she did what terrified her most. She told the truth. I love you. The words were barely a whisper, but they hit like thunder. She hadn't rehearsed them, hadn't planned to say them tonight, but they were real, and they were hers. Nathaniel's breath hitched. Say that again. I love you, she repeated, firmer now, and I'm not going anywhere. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like something precious and fragile all at once. And for the first time, neither of them was running. They didn't talk about what came next, not flights or schedules or timelines. They didn't need to, because something had shifted. Love wasn't a grand gesture or a perfect plan, it was a choice to show up, to stay when it was easier to leave, to say, I'm here, even when the rest of the world is pulling you in every other direction. And that night, wrapped in each other's arms high above the city, Sophia realized something that would stay with her forever. Real love doesn't always arrive with a fairy tale ending. Sometimes it begins in silence, in choosing someone even when it's hard, in letting them choose you back. And as the wind danced around them and the lights of the city flickered like stars, they didn't need forever to begin. They just needed now. 3 weeks later, Sophia stood beside Nathaniel in a glass-walled ballroom, her fingers laced with his as cameras flashed like lightning. Her dress was midnight blue, elegant but understated, chosen not to impress but to feel like herself. It should have felt like a victory, a moment most would envy, and yet all she felt was the weight of 1,000 eyes, watching, judging, assuming. This wasn't just a fundraiser. It was the night Nathaniel Stone introduced her, not just to his world, but as his world. You okay? He whispered in her ear, his voice warm but tense with worry. Sophia smiled for the cameras but kept her voice low. Is it always this much? He chuckled under his breath. This is a quiet night. She nodded, swallowing hard. She'd told herself she was ready. After that night on the rooftop, after that confession, after letting herself fall all the way in. But nothing had prepared her for this. The constant scrutiny, the way strangers spoke her name like they owned it. They'd only just sat down when it began. First, it was whispers, then the looks, and finally the voice, too close to be ignored. She's beautiful, a woman at the next table said with a saccharine smile, loud enough to be heard. But I thought he usually went for someone more seasoned in this world. Sophia's grip on her fork tightened. Nathaniel caught the flicker in her eyes and leaned over. Ignore them. That's easier when they're not dissecting your worth in real time. You're not here for them, he said. You're here for me. She wanted to believe that was enough. But after the event, in the town car, the silence between them felt heavier than it should have. I'm trying, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I know, Nathaniel said, and I hate that you have to. She turned to him. This world. Your world. It has a voice, and it's loud and cruel. Then we'll find a way to turn down the volume. She searched his face, eyes wide, vulnerable. Do you really think love is enough to silence all of that? No, he admitted, but I think it's strong enough to survive it. The car stopped outside his penthouse. He stepped out, then turned to her. You don't have to come up, he said gently. Not if tonight made you question all of this. Sophia hesitated. Then she took his hand and stepped out. I'm not leaving, she said. But I need to know you'll fight with me, not just for me. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Always. And just like that, they disappeared behind the elevator doors. Two people against the noise, against the odds, against the world. Not perfect, but present, still choosing.